know, I've got this dilemma where I'm always asking myself, should I do more fan art or should I concentrate more on my original characters? It's like I've got this angel and this devil on my shoulder trying to convince me to go one way or the other. I guess the only question is, which one does the angel represent and which one does the devil represent? Greetings, people of the internet. I'm Scott with Circworks Art Labs. Welcome, mad creators, to the underground laboratory where we create robots, alien zombies, and other imminent threats to humanity. And a lot of times when I create this stuff, robots, alien zombies, all that stuff, these are my own creations. These are things that come out of my brain, and I like to put on paper or create on the screen or whatever it is, and put that out in the world. And I sort of take ownership of that stuff because these are like my original creations. But the other thing I like to do from time to time is fan art, because I love, you love fandom, you like to create that stuff, and I do create that. If you go back on my channel, I've got, there's some Stranger Things stuff, and that's coming up, so I might do more of that. But, I used to do Fan Art Fridays. I've done the Evil Genius Hall of Fame, where I pay tribute to some of my favorite evil geniuses, and all that stuff is fan art. So I do a lot of fan art. I don't really sell fan art. Like, if you go to my website, I don't really have any of that fan art stuff for sale. For me, and this is my own personal choice, but for me, the stuff that I sell, I like to, like I said, I like to have ownership of that. But there are some definite pluses to selling fan art and things like that, but there are also some drawbacks and some things that you need to be aware of when you're doing that, because I think there's a lot of miscommunication over what is okay to sell as fan art, what isn't, and what risks there are, and whether those risks are worth taking. And I think in a lot of situations they're definitely worth taking, and in some situations maybe not. So you just have to be careful or know what you're going into, because like I said, there's a lot of miscommunication. So I just want to get that out there. And I'm not a legal expert, but I've been doing this for a while, so I know a little bit about this subject. Anyway, so I want to get into that. I want to talk about that, but just to show you that I'm not coming from necessarily one aspect, like, oh, don't do fan art or whatever. I just want to leave it up to you, but I want you to know that I do create fan art. I have created fan art. So I've got this big stack of fan art that I did, and then I also have another big stack of original drawings that I did. And I thought it would be cool just to kind of flip through some of these while I'm talking about it side by side, so you can kind of see sort of the differences and everything. Now, granted, a lot of people are going to probably gravitate more to the fan art because it's stuff they know, it's stuff they've seen. But I would urge you to kind of also take a look at some of the original stuff, because anytime you create something new, it can be the next big, it could become like the next big thing that somebody else wants to do fan art of too. So, and if we just keep recycling the same stuff over and over again, it's kind of like movies, where nowadays all we're getting are sequels and prequels and stuff, and it's refreshing to get some new ideas. So whether you do fan art or not, I also think it's a good idea to get more original stuff out there, because otherwise we're just kind of recycling some of the same ideas. But anyway, enough about that. I want to talk about all these different aspects of fan art versus original art. What are some of the drawbacks? What are some of the pluses with each? So we're going to talk about that while I flip through some of this artwork. So this is a video that I've been wanting to do for a little while now, and I just didn't get around to it. Originally it was sparked by something that happened. If you guys are familiar with Will Terry, he's a children's book illustrator. He had a Kickstarter campaign a little while ago for something that he was working on called Little, which were kind of his version of pop culture characters, kind of done as babies, cute little versions of those. And so he had a Kickstarter, and he was using a lot of fan art and everything with it, and his Kickstarter got taken down. And I wanted to put this video up back when this was happening, because it was a little more timely, but I just didn't get around to it. But anyway, that's what sparked this whole idea, something that I wanted to talk about, because there were a few things I wanted to chime in. Because I was watching, and I've kind of followed some of the stuff that Will was doing, and I really don't know Will. I've met him briefly. I did a very short interview on my channel at one of the conventions, and I talked to him just in passing, just about some just normal stuff, just why you're convention and everything. So, but I don't really know Will that well at all. I really don't. Well, I don't know him at all. But other than that, so just to get that. But I've been kind of following what he was doing, and when he launched this campaign, I was like I was just kind of like, wow, how is he? Because he had already done one
these, and I'm like, I was kind of in the back of my head, I'm like, wow, how is he getting away with this? Because it was very public, it was very out in the open and everything, because people do fan art all the time, but I think once you get to a certain level, or you know, it gets a little more in the eyes of different people. It could go horribly wrong, or it could really go well for you. There's a few different things that could happen. I want to talk about that. But so like I said, when I heard that his Kickstarter got taken down, because I guess Marvel obviously had some issues with some of the characters he was using, you know, at first I was kind of taken aback, but then I really wasn't surprised, because like I said, originally I was thinking, how is he kind of getting away with this? So when his campaign got pulled, I was kind of like, well, it was sort of bound to happen. But I think Will Terry was in and this didn't affect him as much as it could have a lot of people, because he's a pretty smart businessman. He didn't put all his eggs in one basket, and he's still doing really well selling his little designs at shows. And I think the big problem is when he went to Kickstarter and he compiled these into a book. I think that was maybe where he might have went wrong, because you can sell all these individual prints, and if one, say, licensor decides, well, I don't want you to sell that, you can just stop selling those particular prints. But once you collect those into a book, then it's sort of like a house of cards, and it only takes one, you know, if you've got all these different, you know, licensed properties in there, it only takes one of those to just basically, you know, bring the whole thing to a screeching halt, and that's kind of what happened. Now, you know, he's talked about this before on his channel and everything, and you know, so there's a question of what is parody and what isn't, and he's got a very good understanding of what parody is, and I think some of his stuff definitely falls into parody, some not so much, but you know, I think he knew the risk going into it, and there's definitely a risk, but there's also this potential benefit. And I think the key thing is you've got to weigh that, and you have to decide for yourself, is it worth the risk? And I don't know if you ask him now what he would say. Again, I don't really know. But so the problem is not everyone understands the risk, and they don't understand the legalities and everything. I've heard people say, oh, it's okay for me to do this fan art because, or, you know, or they give some definitive answer as to why it's okay for them to do fan art. And anytime you hear anyone try to say definitively that it's okay to do fan art, they really don't know what they're talking about, because there is no definitive answer. I mean, even a lawyer, if you ask a lawyer, they're not going to say straight up, this is, you know, you can't do this or you can, because there's so many different gray areas and there's so many things, and ultimately it's for the courts to decide. So anyone that tries to tell you, yes, it's okay to do this kind of fan art or whatever, they don't have any idea what they're talking about. So you just have to know. Now, again, there are such things as parodies, and a parody is sort of something that's done for it's like exaggerated or done for comic effect. But then you hear people that kind of cite fair use. And typically fair use has nothing to do with fan art. That's more like if you're using something that somebody else created, whether it's an expert from a book or a song or something, in order to do like a review or a commentary or something like that. It really doesn't have anything to do with fan art. So if you hear people talk about fair use as it pertains to fan art, chances are that doesn't have, you know, they probably really don't know what they're talking about either. And again, any of this stuff can be contested in court, even if you are doing parody. So, I mean, you could be doing something straight up parody, and the court could say, no, you can't do that, and then you just kind of have to abide by that ruling. And this is all very complicated, and there's many aspects of copyright law that I don't really understand. Like, for one thing that I don't really understand is likenesses, because I think it's okay to do like celebrity portraits and things like that, but then again, like a company like Disney, they can't use certain likenesses. Like, for instance, on the Indiana Jones ride at Disneyland, they didn't have the rights to use Harrison Ford's likeness. So they had to kind of cheat it and just make it look like a generic sort of Indiana Jones character. Whereas later on, they decided when they're casting for something like Pirates of the Caribbean, they definitely made sure they secured the rights to use Johnny Depp's likeness. So there's a lot of things like that you know, it's very complicated and convoluted and everything. And so, I mean, it's really hard to pinpoint exactly what is okay to use and what isn't, and you just have to understand that. And one of the things, and it's not only, you're not only having to worry about the actual property owners, whoever owns the property that you're doing the fan art, but think you also have to kind of work, because they may turn to sort of a blind eye to it, because in some ways it does benefit their property if a lot of people are doing fan art and everything, because in some ways that builds awareness of it and everything, and it keeps it going, and the bigger the fan base, the more money they can make. So sometimes they will sort of turn a blind eye, and it just depends. I mean, where is that line that they draw? And part of that line that they draw could have to do with not just them, but the licensors, the people that are paying to use those properties, because people officially license stuff. Companies will officially license a character or a property, and then they're thinking to themselves, why are we spending thousands of dollars to license this character when somebody else can just do it for free and sell fan art? It doesn't. So, I think that's a situation where those are going to be some of the people that you have to worry about, because they're like, why am I spending all this money when people can just do it for free? So you have to also take that into consideration. So it's not just the people that own the actual property that you have to worry about. The companies that own these properties are in sort of this precarious position. It's like they're kind of in between a rock and a hard place, because they may say, yeah, they don't have, there's no official stance on any of this stuff. You won't hear Disney come out and say whether it's okay to sell stuff at conventions and things like that. They just won't. But they're not really cracking down on it. But they could if the licensors put up a big enough stink. But I think, because it's sort of under the radar, and I think they realize that this is kind of helping their properties out in some ways. As long as it's not taken away from the bottom line, then you may be all right, but you never know. And the biggest problem is once you get into more kind of high profile things, like if you're sort of partnering up with other companies, like for instance, I think, like back to the Will Terry thing, once he got on Kickstarter, I mean, that's a very public format, very high profile, very visible as a company. So people are going to notice that, and then they're going to say, well, everyone sees this. I mean, we kind of, Marvel might say we have to do something about this. And, it can go a number of different ways, and I'll talk about some of the pros and the cons of fan art and everything. But, they may have something, there may be something going on conflicting with another property that they may already be developing like a children's sort of line using their characters, and they may have to put the kibosh on it there. The other thing is like sites like Redbubble. Like I had this t-shirt design, it's called How to Kill Monsters, and it's basically all the different ways you can kill all these classic monsters from movies. And I was very careful to make sure they're all generic or characters that are in the public domain. But it still got pulled because I had this, one of the things was how to kill a kaiju. And it had this just sort of silhouette of pretty much a generic kaiju. But in the keywords, I had put Godzilla, and I put a lot of things. I would put a lot of the names of actual licensed properties, not because that's actually what was represented in the artwork, but because, I'm trying to, when you use keywords, you're trying to get people who like Godzilla might like this because it has a kaiju in it. And what happens is property owners, in this case it was Toho, who owns Godzilla, they had my design pulled, and I probably could have fought it, but I didn't bother because that's not really what I'm doing anymore. But see, they just have algorithms that scrub these sites looking for things like terms like Godzilla. And even though there wasn't really an actual Godzilla in my design, I was trying to say, hey, if you're into Godzilla, you might like this, just as a flag, as a keyword. And so they just kind of go through and flag these. But these companies like Redbubble, they're constantly getting designs pulled down because they're a little more public. So you have to worry about, once you get into some more of these public areas. And now I mentioned public domain characters. But even like Disney, I mean, most of the properties that they create are based on something that's in the public domain. Most of the original, fairy tales from classic literature, or Robin Hood, Sherlock Holmes, Peter Pan, Jungle Book. I think Jungle Book's in the public domain, but all this stuff is in the public domain, which means you can use it. So you can do like a Little Mermaid or a Beauty and the Beast, but you can't do stuff that's specifically that Disney added to it. For instance, you can't do Belle because in the original it was just Beauty. Her name was just Beauty. But once you start adding likenesses and things that look like what Disney added to that, that's when you start to get into trouble. Ariel, that was created by Disney. That name, that look of that character, all the other little characters like Flounder and Sebastian, those were all created by Disney. Disney's really good at taking sort of something classic that everyone knows and adding their own take on it. And you can kind of do that with fan art, but you just can't. So you could go like, so many people have done different takes on Wizard of Oz, but you can't do the MGM version. Like I think ruby slippers were, something that MGM created. Before it was, I think in the book it was silver slippers. So certain things like that you just have to watch out for. And it's the same thing with like, the classic monsters. You can do Frankenstein, but you can't be too close to something like the Universal Frankenstein. So there's a lot in public domain that you can do. So that's a way, if you're really not sure about doing fan art because of the legalities, there are public domain characters that you can get some of the benefits of that public awareness, but you don't really have to deal with the legal stuff as long as you're doing your own spin on the classic iteration of that. So I want to talk about some of the pros and cons of doing fan art. Now, one I already mentioned when I was referring to the public domain characters about this sort of public awareness. One of the pros to doing fan art is people already know there's name recognition. People know these characters. So this all leads, the biggest pro is if you're selling fan art is the money, because people like the characters, they're going to spend money on it. You don't have to build a fan base. That pretty much can sometimes outweigh all these other risky things. It's just, sometimes it's just a cash cow. I mean, you can just put stuff out and people will buy it up just because they're already familiar with these characters. So, and it's, you're getting, basically what's happening is you're piggybacking off of millions of dollars in most cases, depending on the size of the property, but you're piggybacking off of all of these marketing dollars that are going into promoting this character or these series of characters, and you're totally getting that for free. So that there's a big benefit there. Another benefit, and I've heard this happen a lot, is where you actually garner the attention of the company that holds the license, or not that owns the character, and they may like your take on it, and they may want you to actually do something like that on an official basis. But it's kind of, you never know. I mean, it could be like they could notice it and say, hey, we're going to make you stop this, or they could say they want to maybe pull you in and actually do something official. And that does happen. I've heard that happen quite a bit. I see a lot, like when Will Terry is doing his little things. I mean, I mentioned that could conflict with something somebody else is doing, but certain styles, there's a lot of that stuff, like, Scotty Young, Art Balazar, Chris Girosu, all these people that kind of do these cute versions of characters. Maybe it was just, I don't know how that started, but maybe it was just fan art, and then Marvel may like that style and then brought them in to do something like on an official basis. So that's been known to happen. I've heard a lot of situations like that. Another pro is just, the more eyes on this stuff, because people know who it is, the more it gets shared, the more it gets out there. And the other thing is it's fun. It's fun to have a fandom that you enjoy and do your own spin on it and everything. Because everyone's got their own favorite fandom, and it's just But I would to me, it's like you should do the things you love, not just what's popular. And that can get into some of the cons and everything. So let's talk about a few cons before we go. So the big one is all the legal reasons. Obviously, it's not legal no matter what people say. You can probably get away with doing a lot of this stuff, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily legal. And, you could be given a cease and desist. And if you invest a lot into this fan art, if that's all you're doing, and if somebody puts a stop, you could be out of business like the next day if you're not careful. I mean, I would kind of diversify a little bit if you are going to go the fan art route, because it just takes one thing to just bring the whole thing crashing down. So the other con is that nothing's stopping from somebody else doing the exact same thing you are. When you don't hold that when you don't have ownership of something, if you're doing this one thing, there's nothing to stop me from going out and doing exactly what you're doing, and you can't do anything about it because you don't have any ownership of it. Another con to doing fan art, and this is sort of a big one, at least for me, is that people aren't buying the artwork necessarily because of you created it. They're buying it because they know the property. Most of the time when somebody's carrying around fan art and you're like, hey, who sold you that, or who was it that created that? I don't know, it's Harley Quinn, it's Deadpool, that's all I care about. And so a lot of times that's the case. So they're really not, it's hard, sometimes it's hard to make that transition into buying stuff because you created it. They're just buying it because it's a property that they know. The other thing is it's just hard to stand out because everyone else is doing fan art. I mean, when you go to a comic convention, about probably 85-90% of what's out there is all fan art, and people are all doing mostly the same type of thing. I mean, there are some outliers, but for the most part, people are just kind of doing the same thing. So, there's a lot more pros and cons, and maybe you guys can leave some of them in the comment section, but I could go on forever. But I think the main thing is you just need to know the benefits and the risk before you decide you want to sell fan art or make a business out of selling fan art. And don't be one of those people out there that are so uninformed that they try to tell you that they have the right to do fan art because of this or that, because they really don't know what they're talking about. So just be informed about everything, know going into it the risk, the benefits, all that, and kind of make up your own decision.
All right, so there you go. Those are some of my thoughts, some of my professional experience with fan art and original art and everything like that. But I want to know what you guys think. Do you do a lot of fan art? Do you do a lot of original art? Do you kind of split it up? What are some of your thoughts on fan art? And I know like I said, there's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of people with differing opinions. So if you do have different opinions on anything I've talked about, let me know in the comment section. Let's try to keep it civil. I mean, I'm more than willing to have an open conversation about any of this stuff, but I just, I really don't respond well to people just like, you're stupid, you don't know what you're talking about, this is this and that is that, and so let's not be like that. But if you have a different opinion, let me know in the comments section, and I'd like to hear it, and maybe we can talk more about that, or we can come back to this discussion again with a different angle. Maybe you might convince me of something different. Anyway, let me know in the comments section. I will see you guys later. That is all.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you like what you saw and you want to see more, hit that subscribe button. Also, you can follow me at Circworks on social media. Do you like making comics? Then go to Circworks.com and pick up the Comic Maker Starter Kit. It's packed full of fonts, brushes, templates, and more. And best of all, it's totally free.